Chris is here.
Move the camera, and then it'll go flat, and then concave and curve, and then go, yeah, there's the curve, and then go like that. Oh, it's not there. No, there's the curve. Now it's flat. And it's like the evidence is too flimsy. It's not there.
Yeah, but I mean there are plenty of images of not with fish islands as well, away from it, isn't there? Like looking back at
Yeah, they're all flat. People like me got together, sent high altitude balloons up with proper lenses on.
Yeah.
And it's flat.
Yeah. But I mean you can only see what on a balloon.
Yeah. As high as
you can only go so far into the atmosphere before it expands and pops, so you can't actually get into space. I don't know. I've heard nothing that convinces me, to be honest with you.
Well, here's a good argument for it, right? Space is a vacuum, nothing in it.
Okay.
So how does a rocket propel itself off nothing?
Because of the force of the engine jet coming out the back. The,
on what?
Momentum of energy, isn't it?
There's nothing to push off. So if you get a rocket,
it's not pushing off anything. It's conservation of energy. If I push something that way, then I go that way. That's one of the laws of physics.
Not in space.
What do you mean not in space? The laws of physics are everywhere. It happens on a comet, for instance. A comet's got a flume coming off of that.
I've done this myself.
That's a common misconception that rockets are pushing against it. They're not pushing against anything. That's not how it works. It's if you push something out one way.
So you sat on a chair and throw a brick, you'll move backwards.
Yes, like very, very slightly. Yeah.
The energy's already there. You just but you can't keep that going. And that works as you're holding onto the brick and pushing it.
Yeah. Right.
So you're pushing against the brick.
Yeah.
And that's pushing it back.
Right.
So a rocket goes boom. And it's got to hit something to give it propulsion to move.
Right. Okay. I think I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I think
if there's nothing there, there's no air.
Yeah.
Because helicopters can only go so high because the air's not there.
It's not pushing off air. It's conservation of momentum. It's not. That's not how it works. If you were in a vacuum yourself and you throw a brick, you don't need.
You can still throw the brick.
Say you're sat on a seat and you throw the brick. The reason you go that way isn't because the brick is hitting against some air. That's not what it is. It's conservation of energy. Do you know what I mean?
Because you're holding a mass and you're a mass.
Yeah.
And you're pushing off that mass.
Yeah.
And so it'll equal out. And you'll both move theoretically.
You see, I'm on the very cusp of what I understand. So
you're not throwing a mass out. You're throwing a jet at nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
That's a great question then. Why do you think they've never, they got a vacuum chamber and they're taking a man into the vacuum of space.
Yeah.
So they're designing a spacesuit. Why do you think they've never tested a man in a spacesuit in a vacuum chamber?
Well, they do that, don't they? They've got a big vacuum chamber.
They have, but we've never seen a test conducted where a man has successfully stayed in the vacuum chamber with a spacesuit on.
What, do you mean we've never seen a recording?
Yeah.
Couldn't tell you, I'm not sure. Yeah. I didn't know that we'd not seen one.
So, but I mean, given that NASA have got so much money and they can record all of their tests, and if I was doing telemetry tests and body tests and all these sort of, or whatever tests I was doing, I'd be filming that. The only film I've ever seen of a man going into a vacuum chamber in a spacesuit, they got it into a partial vacuum and he went unconscious.
Right, okay.
So
well, do you know, I'll have to take your word for that because I couldn't tell you if there were. I couldn't tell you if there are recordings or not.
Well, why don't you consider? I mean, surely if there was, by now, 7 years into looking at this, someone would have shown me this recording and said, "Look, here you are."
Of someone in a vacuum chamber.
Yeah, of a man in a vacuum chamber.
Yeah, possibly. So, do you not believe that vacuum chambers exist, or?
Of course, vacuum chambers exist.
Or you don't believe humans can survive in them?
There's no evidence of that.
Okay.
And we know that we can't. You and I can't go in a vacuum chamber unsuited, right? We know we need this spacesuit.
Well, isn't the idea? I mean, if a vacuum chamber can exist, which is a chamber which contains a vacuum, then surely why can't we design a suit that contains the vacuum on the outside and has an atmosphere on the inside, just the same as the chamber?
Okay, so the vacuum chamber that NASA creates is not quite as powerful a vacuum as the vacuum of space, apparently, according to the science that they're giving. But it's a very powerful vacuum chamber. In order to stop that vacuum chamber from sucking itself in, imploding under force, it has to have 8 feet of concrete and steel walls to prevent that. So 8 feet of thick walls is different to a spacesuit that looks like some kind of neoprene, puffy Michelin man. That when I go diving in a water tank, it's going to look and operate exactly the same as it does in the vacuum of space.
Okay.
So then the suit would have to be, I think, probably a strong physical barrier, like a hard barrier. You couldn't then move in it. But that's what I imagine. If I was to protect myself and go into a vacuum chamber, I'd need to get something.
You see, that's the issue. As you said, that's what I imagine. But you're not scientists, and neither am I. You know, so we don't know that that's the case.
But then if you're going
you can't
to
just imagine complex.
Okay, so if I made
science.
I made a claim to you that I went to the moon 5 years ago, would you ask me some evidence of that, or would you just take my word for it?
No, of course I would. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm asking for evidence that we can put a man in a vacuum chamber before we take him to space. So we need to show that we can actually achieve that by protecting him well enough in a vacuum chamber, which is nothing seems to operate in. So.
But it's almost pointless speaking to me because I don't know if there are images or not. You know,
so I'm offering you as a young man, because you're young and you've got your life ahead of you, to go, hey man, there's some questions that I've never been pointed to say, why can't we do this? Because I watched documentaries as I was a young man on why we went to the moon and why they say we faked it, and I believe we went to the moon up until 47, I believe that. And now there's so much evidence that says, no, there's things that you didn't look at, that if you looked at them, you go, no, but how did you achieve that? How did you land this lunar lander on the moon when you never managed to test this sort of 4 retro rocket leg thing and successfully landed on Earth when the atmosphere is easier to control?
Well, I think it was hoisted, wasn't it? I think the gravity was artificially added to the craft, wasn't it, with hoists? If I remember correctly.
Well, no, but okay, so you're going
and also, given it's less gravity than Earth, surely anything that can survive on Earth will be survive easier in terms of materials on the moon.
Well, my point is it hasn't survived on Earth yet.
Right, okay.
We've never shown this on Earth.
Well, listen.
And the one they tested, Neil Armstrong crashes, he gets it in the air for about 40 seconds, but he crashes it and it doesn't have any weight on it. It's just a chassis.
Yeah.
They're not even flying all the cooling, so all the stuff that they needed, the batteries to power these cameras that can film things from. You know, here's the thing with the filming, right? They take camera up there. And they film themselves playing golf and dune buggies, but they never take video footage of the Earth rotating, which would have been a slam dunk. Here's the Earth spinning in space, there's stars around it and so on.
Yeah, right, okay.
Do you think that would be great evidence if I was offering to you?
I suppose, I mean, there's images of the Earth, isn't there?
Images, but images are not photographs.
But you want to see the rotation?
Well, they went 6 times, they landed 6 times successfully apparently, but only on the final mission, or the last but one mission, they bothered to take a single photograph of the Earth from space. So if you and I, again, common sense, if you and I went to a place we've never been to before, it's absolutely
that's
beautiful.
common sense as someone
Grand Canyon. You know, you've gone to the Grand Canyon. No, surely, hold on. We've gone to the Grand Canyon, right?
Yes,
and your family, you get back from your Grand Canyon trip, and your family say, let's see the photos. And you say, oh, sorry, I only took a few photos of me playing golf.
Right.
I forgot about taking a picture of the Grand Canyon. Let me go back next week.
Yes.
All right, I'll go back next week. Oh, shit, I forgot again. Yeah, hold on, I'll go back next month.
Wait.
Oh shit! They went 5 times.
You're coming from the perspective who wants it proven to them that the Earth is a spinning globe,
and you're coming from the perspective who doesn't want to disprove.
No. What I'm coming from, I'm trying. Let me speak. What I'm trying to get in the mindset of in this particular subject is, if I'm NASA, you have a list of priorities. You have a certain amount of resources. Maybe that wasn't one of the priorities.
What?
Getting film, using up film to get the Earth spinning on that particular mission.
Oh. See, most people in the world really were on the cusp of, do we live on a globe, don't we? You know, just because most people.
I think it was pretty much accepted in the 60s, wasn't it?
Well, by the 60s maybe, but it really sealed the deal. You know, by showing the Earth from space, it was like, okay, we must be spinning on nothing. You know.
Well, people still trusted science, didn't they?
They still trust science today. Do you see what they did to people in 2020?
What?
You don't remember 2020?
What, are you talking about COVID?
I'm talking about lockdown. Anyway.
Oh right, yeah. What about it?
Well, there's very much divided science on that. I don't want to.
There's, and I'm not saying all of I'm not saying it's clear cut in any way. But
so science is not. You see, that's the problem. Is that science is not a slam dunk. Even germ theory that Pasteur came up with said actually it's wrong.
Yeah.
Everything is about terrain. The person's environment is the major determining factor.
But you'll struggle to find, even if the consensus isn't 100% agreed on, you'll struggle to find any sort of scientists who will endorse the idea of flat Earth. It's very rare to come across, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
So why is that then? Because I understand that there are differences in opinion in science, because some things obviously are in theory, some things can't be proved. But why is it general consensus amongst the majority of scientists that we live on a globe?
The same reason the majority of Christians think that Jesus died for their sins. It's because the.
So you said it's belief, just belief.
Because remember, the globe is built on three fundamental theories: relativity, evolution and Big Bang. Those things on their own are all ideas. If this, then this, then this. Give billions of years, lots of time that we can't record, lots of things that we can't ever prove for ourselves. We can't make life ourselves. We can't grow life. We can't make water.
Yeah.
These are things that we can't do, but we claim we know how it's done because we've got this theory of gravity.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, no, why don't you step away from the theology and say, what can I prove for myself? What can I actually test? Rather than taking some scientists who, let me put it to you like this. I don't believe that NASA scientists or scientists in the main are somehow misleading people because they think that the Earth is flat or is that whatever. No, not at all. The guys who took Newtonian science got A star at school, they took it at university. And then the best of them went on and taught it or became...
So you're saying they've been indoctrinated?
Do you know what apartheid is?
Yes. I do,
So apartheid was an indoctrination system that took very intelligent people and made them racist.
Okay.
You're aware of that?
Yeah.
They're not. You know what happened to the Jews in World War II?
Yes, I do.
So the Germans, very intelligent people. Were they indoctrinated?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So could you be indoctrinated?
But the Germans were indoctrinated with. There's a difference between. The thing is, the idea of science is to develop a system which can't be influenced by indoctrination.
So then why do pharmaceutical companies...
Because that's the whole point in the entire scientific process, is to wean out that sort of
So that's, I mean, I was taught that as well, and I also used to trust democracy. I thought that was a legitimate system too. But the problem with the pharmaceutical industry is that it is a business, and it has a vested interest in you requiring its services. So it's very easy to see possibly how it might want to, for example, demonize natural medicine. Take cannabis, for example, and turn it into a crime. I know people personally who cured their cancer with cannabis oil. So the pharmaceutical industry knew this back in the 1920s, but they had oil that they could start making these drugs with and replicating things in the body, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So anyway, so you end up with a system that is intentionally, even though the good doctors today, they're not taught about cannabis being good, they're taught about cannabis being bad. Certainly they were back in the day, right? So no one would recommend that to anyone. In fact, they would say you needed help if you were using cannabis for your medicine. But if you go back 100 years ago, plant medicines were all people had, you see. So it is possible for scientists to be given a workbook and say, this is what you must study. You don't study from the other books. When you go to university, you're given 10, 20 books to study, and that's it. That's all you've got to study. Just follow those rules. You don't. And so when it comes to accepting gravity and how gravity can cause mass attracting mass and all of that sort of stuff, if you buy that, you might as well buy Jesus Walked on Water and go, okay, well, I accept that. I'm going to build my worldview on that basis. And
but to be happy with that conclusion, do you need to make those measurements yourself?
Yes.
So, in that respect, does that mean that before you let a surgeon operate on you, you need to make sure that he's doing the right thing? Or before you, get your car worked on by a mechanic, you need to make sure you understand the full process?
Well, not
because you can't
necessarily.
Personally understand every complex subject. That's the point in collective knowledge, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I don't personally understand many, complex subjects.
But if that's the only way you can confirm anything, then you won't know anything apart from the one thing
that you... To make it more complicated? I'm offering you simplicity. See, you see, the Occam's razor says if you can't decide, the simplest option is the correct one.
And the simple option is the entire model of the globe is a big lie.
No, that's the
Because that doesn't sound like the simplest option.
Conspiracy is a hard step to get over, but the simplest way for me and you to build a model of Earth using a flat swimming pool with some stones in it versus us trying to engineer a ball that had water, pool, rivers and lakes and oceans underneath it. You know that physically we could do the one that I'm proposing. Occam says you cannot do the other one because we don't actually have a working model of that. We've got plenty of lakes in the world with flat maps stuck in them where people are showing this is how the world looks like. In Sydney they've got a massive one in the centre of Darwin, I think, or somewhere, I forget now. But they've got this massive one where it's like the United Nations logo in a swimming pool.
Okay.
And that is like, well, that's the flat Earth. All you need to have is a dome over the top because you need thermodynamics, you need pressure. Like the Eden Project, you need to enclose it, you need to give it water, you need to give it air. Otherwise, everything else is.
When you say that, you say, well, I can't understand you saying that as if that's a simple option.
Okay, so offer me an example of your globe floating. It has to be floating.
Yeah.
These are the requirements that you.
But floating, that's from your perspective. Floating doesn't mean floating. Why, if anything, why is floating any less or any more complicated? Sorry, than us being glued to the ground. Why is that any? I don't understand why that's more complicated.
Because I've never seen anything float unless it's got an engine that's pushing it.
Yeah, I mean you've seen planes.
Yeah, that's what an engine.
Yeah.
Pushing it, yeah. So they can kind of, I mean, they're not floating, they have to keep moving. But I understand that, an hot air balloon will float up because of, the lighter air inside, yeah? So the buoyancy, you just said it, the buoyancy has changed.
I understand, of course I understand what you're saying. I just think you're thinking, solely from your perspective. And it's like, well, no, because if you were to say to an animal, if you were to say to an animal has no idea about the majority of things on Earth, but that doesn't mean that the truth is what the animal experience is. But my dog doesn't know this street exists, doesn't know that the majority of the world exists, but that doesn't mean that my dog should believe that. It doesn't mean that's the truth. Do you know what I'm saying?
No, because for me, like the dogs and the animals and the plants and all of that stuff is like Disneyland, and you are the living entity that's come to play in Disneyland. Okay. So these are sort of characters on the stage. They're not the living expression of creation, intellectually meant to kind of understand its place here. And so
is that what we are?
Yeah, for me, because I was atheist at 47, I thought there was nothing to this place. I did DMT, and in 5 minutes, 6 minutes, I knew there was a God here. There's a God, and what the game doesn't want you to know is that you are the center of the wheel, you're the hub, and all of the world, the universe should sort of center itself on you, rather than you are just on the outside of the wheel, insignificant, it's dangerous, all sorts of hazards and giving up of control.
But I wouldn't say that the model that's accepted within science now in terms of the globe and the universe, I wouldn't say that. Why does that make us insignificant?
Because I was a heliocentrist, man. I was all about Big Bang, coming out of Africa. That was me.
But surely isn't that beautiful?
No. That's just like saying imagine you threw a grenade in a scrap heap and said, I'm going to get a Ferrari out of that. Impossible. Yeah. And it's not beautiful. It's just a lucky strike. Whereas if it's like, no, I'm going to intend to come in my body, this body here, because I think that you are an expression of God. I say to people, like, if we're inside of an orange, one tiny cell of the orange is no less orange, even though in magnitude it's less. And that's what you are. But this game, because I thought that we came from monkeys, evolution, we got lucky the dinosaurs went away, blah, blah, blah. I believed all of that stuff. But actually that made me feel really insignificant or not insignificant like I don't matter.
I think
more
it's beautiful.
Like my life didn't matter. Whereas honestly, having come through that, I'm offering you that it's far more beautiful that your parents intended to create you than rather, some guy rammed in the back door and, raped your mother.
Okay.
Yeah?
I mean, you don't have to go that far.
That is a little harsh. Sorry for that.
Listen.
But you get my idea. The point is that this is meant to be a loving, beautiful thing rather than a random, chaotic, just a Big Bang. Because in Big Bang, by the way, in this system, it gives us this prison planet mentality which says you need Russia, you need Putin, you need America, you need Donald Trump, you need Boris Johnson. You need all of these things rather than actually you're the master of the universe. That this is your universe. We're a multiverse here. There's many of us universes actually visiting each other, and we should treat each other with honor, love, respect, and all of that sort of stuff. And if we did that and we lived our higher way, then after we've learned our life lessons, we would not need policing. We would not need.
But do you not? I mean, obviously the world has gone to shit. I understand global politics is a mess. But I personally, I have those things regardless of whether we originated in the Big Bang or evolved. You know, I mean, there are. It doesn't strip us of meaning just because we arrived out of some chaos, you know. Like they say that the elements that make up our bodies were forged in the middle of stars, you know. It's pretty beautiful.
Yeah, I used to think so
beautiful?
too. I used to, my older children who are
if anything, is that not more beautiful than
than
a creator that's apparently all-powerful and all-loving, yet allows suffering, you know?
No, that the suffering is either part of like some kind of soul contract. This is how I see it now. It's either some kind of soul contract that we're going to create a place that's hard, and you're going to go in there and have 80 years of hard service, as it were. That's one idea. The other idea. Why?
If he's all loving, why?
Well, no, because
why make us just to test us, and then just to send the majority of us to eternal suffering?
That's one option. Another option I have on the table is that we do come from a loving essence, but the essence knew that in creating this, that essence was creating night and day. It was creating light and dark, hot and cold.
Yeah.
And so dualism comes into play. And so in dualism, when humans are expressing themselves, we start to take positions, and those positions become entrenched. And then over time, it's like maybe the 7 sins they talk about, the greed and all those things start to come into play. And over eons, maybe that greed turns into pyramids and turns into Caesar and turns into a system of democracy. That means that you are no longer it feels like you're no longer from this loving thing, but you're actually in a game of thrones. And that we're pit against each other, and we go to war against each other. And by the way, all this globalism for me does that. Imagine if we knew we were all sharing the Eden Project together, and one, it can kind of heal itself. We should take care of ourselves first, and then it will kind of take care of itself if we were taking care of ourselves. And that we're all meant to be working in harmony, in love, because that's where we come from, rather than borders, colors. The roses, there's different color roses, but that we shouldn't be frightened of the red rose and the white rose. And that they're both roses from the same garden.
I 100% agree. I think we both have very similar outlooks in terms of end goal and the way and the philosophy that we have about life and what should be important and what should be meaningful. You know, the thing I really struggle with is the idea of a creator, like I say, being apparently all loving but all powerful as well.
Do you think you struggle more with the idea, though? Because that's later down the line. Yeah, okay. But that for me is later down the line, and I had the advantage of the DMT. But I had to first realize that the Earth was flat before I was like, oh shit, this whole game is staged. Because when you get to that point, for me, it's a liberation. Although initially angry and maybe upset or whatever, wanting to rail against it, actually you realize that, wow, the whole thing. So that's why, for me, you've got to move through, if there's a poison that was administered to you and that poison is still within you, then it's still having an effect on you. And until that poison is released, then you can never find your true story.
If I was to find out one day that, without any shadow of a doubt that the Earth was flat, of course that would change my entire world. Of course it would. But personally, I don't find my meaning and I don't find my philosophies from the wider view in that way anymore. I just try not to because I don't know, I'm trying to find the right way to say it really. I think the things around me in terms of family and in terms of the things that I love, in terms of, I make a lot of music for instance, it's something I find very meaningful, And I try to narrow my view to those things now, especially with how crazy the world is, and almost try and retreat from engaging with the wider idea, because as far as I'm concerned, if what's around me is okay, and if my family and what's meaningful to me is okay, then that's as far as I want to go.
Because that's your universe, and that's what you've got to attend to, is those 4 things at the heart.
But there's still a connection there to the spiritual, which is where you derive meaning from. You know what I mean? So it's not as if retiring from those bigger things somehow detaches you from the spiritual or the meaning. It's because I find those things closer to me than that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to say.
There's a phrase in the Bible, I think, to be in the world but not of the world, And so we're in the world now, but the more you're caught up, just to say the Ukraine thing that happened recently, you know, if you're caught up in the news, then your world is being shaped by something external to your reality, really, because whatever happened in Ukraine or is happening is outside of our sphere of effect. But the difficulty we have, because we're collective here, that if all of your neighbors get brainwashed into believing a certain thing, then the whole neighborhood could insist that everybody does something that you don't necessarily agree with, that is an infringement on your personal liberty, your personal sovereignty. See, and that's where I think that, like 2020 was a great example of how collectively we can be brought to interfere with someone else's universe, to say, I'm going to look over the fence and tell you what to do now. And that's why I think they control the mind, is that they want to be able to have a collective control over the whole system, if you like, rather than having individuals uniquely having their own universal experience, honoring the golden rule, love your neighbor. But anything else, pretty much, you know, it's your world, and go and explore it. And we should be finding ways to free ourselves to explore it, rather than increasingly trapped in a 40-year mortgage program and a life that leaves you with 5 years of retirement at the end, and all you've ever known is Leeds and a few other holiday resorts that you might have gone to once or twice, kind of thing. And that's not really us finding our true nature, because true nature is not in the city, although obviously us fellow human beings are expressing that nature. I just think that we're doing it in a way that has been skewed from the way that nature originally intended. So it is a bit of a minefield out here when you come out here. There's all these things to entertain you, the alcohol, the shopping, whatever it is, you know, and then so people end up putting their energy, their life energy into that. And is it simple as the shopping kings want to make sure that you spend your money with them, or is there a soul thing going on here, saying, like they said in the Bible, don't be caught up in the Sodom and Gomorrah. You know, when Noah says it's time to leave, then it's time to leave.
But does that same thing exist within the sort of community that you come from, in terms of either religion or this sort of flat earth thing? Is that becoming in some ways just another one of these distractions? Because of course you think it's truth, but
it can be. And within the community, there are people who, to say whether it's geoengineering, whether it's 5G, whether it's any of these different things, there are people within there that spend their whole life fixated on that, whether it's child trafficking, you know, there's people who think, and the same with the flat earth. You know, for me, the first 2 years of flat earth were very like, that's all I wanted to talk about, kind of thing, you know. Now, not so much, but I use it as a conduit to, or as a gateway to say to people there's something more, because really it is an inner story, you know. Ultimately, everything, the spindle, as I say, is you, and everything comes back to the center of the clock. Everybody's fixated on the hands of the clock. They're all out there on time and running around at full speed, trying to keep up with the second hand going around the clock. When I say, no, it's turning at 15 degrees an hour, but it's only like a tiny little bit of movement, because it's all centered on you. The lights center on you. The universe is meant to balance itself around you. And if we all knew that, then we would have a very different relationship with the people who run the roads and the schools and so on. And we wouldn't indoctrinate our children into believing that they came from monkeys and black people became white people and all that sort of stuff. When it's only God intended for there to be yellow and red and white roses in the garden, and for them to look just like you do here. Every snowflake comes different, apparently, and each of us comes looking slightly different from each other, but we all come from the same snowfall, from the same source, essentially.
I know what you're saying,
And that's really why it matters to me. Can flat earth be a distraction? Well, if anything, you know, what Hollywood does, and NASA and so on, is they offer vast amounts of distractions to people. And you know, even the Netflix agenda and the Hollywood agenda, it's all about holding people's time, and people spend hours each day watching football, watching movies, playing games, all this sort of stuff. It's like, wow, so and I'm spending a couple of hours a day or whatever doing something like this. It's in balance. I'd say no, I never watch the TV. I never have time for that anymore. I do other things with my time, but my wife is, and I told she's like, it can't be. She was there in 2017. It cannot be just about flat Earth. There's something much more going on.
Right.
And it became the spiritual path for me to realize that. And I don't see myself as unique. I think we're all exactly the same. It's just that when you were born, we all come with a perfectly level, settled pool, but they start to interfere with that pool from young. needles and spools and this and that and so on. And that pool gets more and more choppy over the course of your life, you know. And so ultimately our goal, I think, is to try and get back to a calm pool, each of us, and settle these things that are trying to annoy us from the outside or trying to entertain us from the outside.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and you know, I mean, this is not I've had this conversation many times. So one of my best friends is flat earther, the right thing to say. I don't know if you know. He's a flat earther anyway, and he's big time Christian. So we had these actually a couple of days ago, a massive debate about it. You know, so I'm used to talking about it, and I always find myself in a situation in which I agree. Like I said a minute ago, I agree with a lot of the end goals, you know. I agree with a lot of the overall conclusions about society. Of course I do. You know, it's not as if I'm blind to the how fucked up everything is. But at the same time, I just think the different ways in which we get there is there's just too many things for me that can't be overlooked, and people, for instance, who don't dedicate their lives to studying something, then knowing that subject more than the people who do, and that's the crux of it for me. I just can't overcome that issue, you know. If you were to come to me and say, you know, I'd spent so many years doing this and that for 10, 15, 20 years doing climate science, and I've had access to these instruments, I've had access to the data, and what you're being told isn't lining up with what I've seen in this industry, that would be a more compelling argument to me. Okay. But the fact that we don't see people doing that who have worked in that industry for years, and I just don't believe...
Let me offer you two things quickly.
Yes,
One, I was in the army as a kid. We had to do 2 years national service, and I went to war in a country called Angola. And I was firing at long range. I had a 90mm cannon. I was in an armored vehicle with a 90mm cannon. My gunner would pull the trigger, but I was the crew commander. And I had to know, in order so I didn't die, I had to know exactly how to use my weapon. I'm sure you know. And I was in the biggest tank battle in Africa since World War II, as a matter of fact. And the biggest battle victory for the South African Defence Force in all of its time. So just, you know, and I wrote a book about it. So I know that I had to do with a gun everything I had to do in order to wipe out, there were Russian tanks that were fighting against. And in order to take those targets out, I had to know my job and know my weapon absolutely. And I know that this thing that they talk about, that snipers have to allow for the spinning of the earth, is a lie. You know, the rifling on the barrel will have an effect on the way that a projectile might drift. I get that. And wind will certainly have an effect on it. But I'm shooting at 2 kilometer range, and I have no problem with this idea that the target that I'm shooting at is stationary. Oh, it might be moving, the target might be moving, but that's because it's moving, not because once the projectile leaves the ground will continue moving, but the projectile is no longer held to the ground and therefore is subject to Coriolis. This cannot be substantiated. Then, of course, topographical maps, I had to understand them very well as part of my training, and I've done hiking since then. And topographical maps they start at 0 at the beach, and they go up to whatever height the hill, mountain, whatever it is. And then when you get to over the hill and you go over the mountain down the other side and you get to the beach